That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G are specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441. Hello and welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly news podcast of the Free Speech Union. Hello, Ben. Welcome back to our listeners. Welcome back to our viewers. Another week in the free speech world. And we just sent out our monthly newsletter this morning, beginning of November. If you can believe that, we're 10 months through 2024. Yesterday was New Year's Day, as far as I can remember. But I felt that this week's monthly was absolutely jam-packed full of information. And one thing we did over the weekend, just before we went to press, based on a query that Toby had, was given our growth, the Free Speech Union has grown incredibly over the summer. And we are transforming rapidly, I think, in terms of the pace of work that we're doing and the growth rate. He said, well, can we have a look? I know we're not a trade union, which is right. We're a mass membership body. We're not a formal trade union. But let's have a look at how we compare to other trade unions and how we compared just 3 or 4 months ago. So I went out and I discovered this incredible data source, Ben, called the Form AR21. Only a data person can get really excited about a Form AR21.
Bear with us, listeners.
Bear with us. But this is it's a data minefield. Mine. It's a gold mine of data, because you can find out the size from the latest return of all the registered trade unions. So I put them all together, and it really was astonishing. Obviously, we're nowhere near the top 5 unions, which I think Unison, Unite the Union, and then at the top you've got GMB, Royal College of Nursing, and the National Education Union. But we are very close, surprisingly close, actually, to some pretty well-known unions. So we're bigger than the... I'm just looking at this the wrong way around. We're bigger than the British Airline Pilots Association, BALPA. We're bigger than the Social Workers Union. We're bigger than the British Dental Association. We're bigger than Affinity and FDA. And there's a big marine union called Nautilus International. We're just tucked in underneath Accord, which is a union for Lloyds Bank employees, Lloyds Bank Group and subsidiaries. And we're pretty close to the National Union of Journalists, and indeed Aslef. So Aslef is just shy of 25,000 members, and we've just gone over 20,000 members. So we're a pretty sizable organization, not a trade union, but if we tuck ourselves into that league table, we are moving up it rapidly, which I think says a lot about the importance of the work we're doing and the growing importance of what we do in the broader backdrop, but it also very clearly shows the problem that we have and the rate at which that's accelerated since the new Labour government came in. And
it has been astonishing, hasn't it, Tom, this stat that you pulled out that's quoted in the monthly newsletter, that we have gained a membership increase of 43% since the election, going from 14,000 members at the beginning of July to just over 20,000 now. And correspondingly, there's been a huge increase in the number of people asking us for our assistance, people coming to us saying that they've been cancelled, that they're in trouble of some kind for something they've said, be it in the workplace or for students or academics or whoever. And as a result of that, we are hiring at the moment. We have 2 new posts open for case officers in the case team, this is like the sort of triage unit assisting people who come to the FSU who first need urgent assistance in a situation, whatever it is. So if you have worked in an MP's office, or you've worked for Citizens Advice Bureau, or for a law firm, or you've worked for a public body handling complaints or casework of some kind, or if you have some other experience that sounds broadly applicable to our work, please do get in touch. We are in need of new staff. And Tom, as you know, and I think we've probably reminded listeners of this recently, we're on track to have an average of 1,000 new cases per year at our rate of work since summer.
Very easily on track for that, Ben. We're on track to have over 1,000, and we watch it like a hawk. Every week we look at how many new cases have come in, and it's just not going anywhere near where it was before the new government came in at the moment.
Yeah, sky high.
Well, there's an update as well on the Freedom of Speech, or the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. As most listeners and most viewers will already know, Bridget Phillipson essentially sort of put a stroke of her pen through that act back at the end of July, and ceased the commencement of the act. And we have commenced a judicial review of that decision, and there's lots of organizations, lots of academics who have raised their concerns, as well as just the Free Speech Union. But the good news is that judicial review hearing has now got a date. It will be heard in the High Court on January the 23rd. And as listeners and viewers may or may not know, our argument was that the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, was not actually entitled to pull the plug on the Act just through that ministerial statement, because any repeal of legislation is a matter for Parliament. It's not the executive who can just do that. And indeed, a High Court judge in a document confirming the permission to appeal the move that we made, said that it was in the public interest for this issue to be resolved promptly. And as well as that, the judge said that even if Miss Phillipson intended only to pause the act while options were being considered, it is arguable that it was insufficient for the purposes of Section 149 of the Equality Act 2010 to proceed on the basis that no significant impacts were foreseen. So again, that duty to look at what the impacts are from an Equality Act perspective, there's a question mark there over whether that was met in the way that this act was paused. So that's good news that our judicial review is proceeding. Though, of course, if this government decide to repeal the act in the meantime, ahead of that hearing, then it all becomes moot, in the sense that the act will then no longer exist. But there will be an opportunity for the Parliament to hold the government's feet to the fire, which is the point we've made before.
They should have to fight the battle.
Yeah.
I think that's the point. They should have to fight the battle. If they're going to repeal the Freedom of Speech Act, they should have to go out and explain on media rounds, on the doorstep, in the House of Commons, why they're doing that and what basis they have for thinking that such an appalling decision is a good idea. So that's part of it. It's very welcome, of course, how things have developed, and the government's legal woes are the battles they're encountering are racking up now, aren't they? With challenges also on private school fees and all the fallout from the budget and everything as well. So good news, but as you've warned, Tom, it's not necessarily decisive. The government could then just say, okay, well, we'll repeal it, but at least they'll have to fight the battle.
Can I just quote a Keir Reindorf KC as well, Ben? So there was actually a debate on this legislation at City University of London last Wednesday, and it became very, very heated, apparently. So there were sort of accusations flying across the room, such as it's a far right agenda. We've heard the act being described as a hate speech charter. And what Keir Reindorf, who is an Equality and Human Rights Commissioner and barrister, she was there in a personal capacity at the debate, She said that suggestion was depressing and pure guilt by association. And then she goes on to say, I'm also so incredibly sick of being accused of being involved in a moral panic, as if we're all sort of Mary Whitehouse clutching her pearls. We have some very, very serious incidents that we are all very familiar with. People who are very senior in universities being hounded out of their jobs or hounded around their campus. It's a very serious issue. It affects people's lives, their livelihoods, and also their fundamental human rights. And she goes on, freedom of speech is the fundamental human right. It is the core right in the Human Rights Act, because without freedom of speech, we cannot advocate for our other human rights. The perspicacity of that last statement in particular, it shows why Keir Reindorf is indeed a KC. You get that straight to the point. Without that freedom of speech, without that freedom of expression, we cannot fight for our other rights. It's kind of obvious, but sometimes the obvious things need to be said. And certainly, Ben, I think you'd agree, this government needs to be reminded of why freedom of expression is so fundamental, because they don't seem to understand that very obvious point that Keir Reindorf has made during that debate.
Well, I think they understand why freedom of speech is dangerous.
Yes.
That's my sense of so much of progressive politics and progressive government in the Western world now, is that things are so rickety. And we put out a statement last week about Southport that I'd direct listeners to go and read in terms of what you can safely say online and what you can't. And the extent to which it's clear what you can and can't say safely online without the police knocking on your door. I think the thing that shines through everything this government does with respect to freedom of speech is viewing small L liberalism, freedom of expression that we all value, as being dangerous to a pretty rickety social and political order. And I think that's what shines through. And the argument I just wanted to pick at one point, Tom, that you mentioned there about the idea that this is a moral panic about freedom of speech on campuses. I mean, all of our listeners and viewers will know that's a nonsense, that the evidence for this crisis is irrefutable. The scale of it is incredibly vast. But even just this academic term beginning September, October, we've had cases of people coming to us who would have been protected under the new Act had the Act come into force as it should have done. And the fact that the government has done this sort of sly, treacherous pocket veto of the legislation is already causing real world harm. And we can make all of these points, of course, which is why the news is so welcome.
Yeah. Well, we will continue to feed back as this issue rolls forward to that hearing date, and of course, as I said, it could all change very quickly and become moot potentially. But yeah, it needs to be the case that we remember how important freedom of expression is. I really do take on board your point there that freedom of speech is perceived as dangerous, and in a way, it is dangerous. It is dangerous. It does. Governments are toppled by freedom of speech. Regimes are toppled by freedom of speech. Whole structures of thinking and ordering people around are toppled by freedom of speech. And so there is a sense in which governments are always, when you're in power, you're always afraid of freedom of expression. But good, we look at the great parliamentarians through history, and they are comfortable with that. Even when they hold power, they are comfortable with the level of challenge that comes from a country where you have freedom of expression. So there are lots of points, very fundamental points that we, as I say, we come back to when we think about this a bit more deeply. Should we move on then to talk about the football governance bill? I'm not sure that football governance is quite our area of expertise, Ben, to be brutally honest.
Well, not for the two of us, but the FSU has, of course, been as an organisation, we've been wading into these matters with the case of Lindsay Smith that I dare say we'll come on to in a moment. But yes, Tom, I think we would probably have to concede that football is not our natural forte.
It's not our natural forte. But what's happened here is that there is something called the Football Governance Bill. And Sir Keir Starmer has now resurrected it. So it did fall by the wayside during the last Parliament. And among a whole bunch of red tape, for want of a better phrase, that it threatens upon football clubs, it will also impose a requirement that they submit a corporate governance statement to a newly created independent football regulator. And that statement needs to say what action a club is taking on equality, diversity, and inclusion. So far, no surprise. This is exactly what's infected the corporate world, and as we know, it's normally a politicized form of EDI that hits the governing documents of whether it's a regulator or people's employers. It hits codes of conduct, and it effectively imports a speech code. But our concern here is that it will indeed normalize what happened to one of our members, Lindsay Smith, that we talked about right at the beginning of this year, 2024. And what will happen is that, like her, but in this case, tens of thousands of fans could potentially be banned from attending football games simply because their political views put them at odds with these new EDI policies. And do you want to give a brief summary of what happened in the Lindsay Smith case, Ben? You'll probably be able to put that in a nutshell better than I could.
Well, if you predicted a decade ago that by 2024 we'd be living in a world in which you would be stalked by official footballing bodies for expressing the view that men cannot become women online, and that such a body would build up a dossier of evidence about you, including things like where you walked your dog. Congratulations, because you were bang on the money. I suspect most of us didn't anticipate that such things would be possible, and yet that is what has happened to Lindsay Smith. So we've been assisting her for a good long time now with that matter, and I think as with so many of these things, I think because of this government, we now have a perfect storm, Tom, don't we? Where you already have a willingness on the part of footballing bodies of various sorts to monitor what fans are saying outside the stadium, crucially, what their views are about social, cultural, political debate. There's the drive within football to stamp out racism, and I think there is every possibility for that to have become, through a process of mission creep, to an initiative to stamp out all kinds of prejudice, in inverted commas, which I think has been interpreted to include lots of gender critical beliefs that the vast majority of the public agree with. And then you have the third party harassment that is being introduced by the government. So I think because of all of those factors, you do have a perfect storm for freedom of speech, where if you're a football fan, you're not just thinking, I might be in trouble for shouting something racist in the stadium, which is one matter. I think people have a pretty clear view about whether that's right or wrong. But you might get in trouble for posting a tweet online about protecting women's rights or girls' spaces, or for saying that trans ideology is nonsense. And yet those two completely different things, I think, have been elided.
Conflated. And it is a lethal cocktail, as you hint, this both having this football governance bill, which will essentially bring into being new machinery to police fans and to police the political views of fans where they don't line up with equality, diversity, and inclusion. Whether it'll be equity, diversity, and inclusion, I don't know. But I'm sure that the people who come in to do the training and bring in the materials will be the usual suspects, and it'll kind of move towards equity rather than equality. We shall see. But then on the flip side, as well as all that machinery coming into existence, as you say, with the Employment Rights Bill, you've then got third parties overhearing something, being able to report their employer and say, hey, we got upset by this. And that employer has to take all reasonable steps to protect their employees from being harassed by third parties. So, I mean, again, the reason in football this is so, I wonder whether it'll be possible to police it, but it is very chilling, is because so much of football is the chants that we hear in the stands. Often it's inappropriate jokes. It's Saturday afternoon banter, and it is very much tradition. It is very much part of our culture. And again, as you hinted at, Ben, obviously absolute out there racism, sexism, the sort of thing that most of us would look at and say, yeah, that's beyond the pale, should not be tolerated. We get that. But so much of what goes on now is now sort of going into that pen of intolerable speech, even when it is just stuff that makes people feel upset and offended, rather than stuff that is actually personal attacks on players that call just overt racism, which clearly most fans would say that's not on.
It's a kind of sterilization and also middle classification of football, of every aspect of community public life, and it would have been the case in the pre-internet age that you speak in different registers with different people, and that what you say to your mates in the pub is different to what you say to your boss, and that you speak in a different way to your parents than you do to your friends. These things are obvious, but now, I think largely because of the internet, although not entirely because of the internet, we've reached a point where one uniform standard is being imposed everywhere, where you must speak in exactly the same register to all people at all times, that you must pass this ideological litmus test. And if you don't, if you say the wrong thing even to your friends, you will be ostracized or hounded. They might put a complaint into your employer or to a university if you say the wrong thing. Your football club is going to be monitoring what you say online. It's this crushing 360-degree authoritarianism that is coming from everywhere at everyone.
And no one wants it.
And no one wants it.
Tiny minority of loud people who've managed to worm their way into governance bodies, regulators, quangos, bureaucracy. Small number of people who've wormed their way in and are now the killjoys for all the rest of us, redefining what hate is, saying that hate, that free speech is no longer a core freedom. It doesn't matter. And creating everything into sort of very fragile responses to what is just normal human life rubbing along. We get upset every now and then. Well, we just jog on. We don't make a big deal out of it. But well, we will be watching this space with this new football. Just get it right. What it's called, a football governance bill. We'll be watching that, and we'll feedback on any developments in that area. But to finish, again, we've got another area that we've worked on over the last week or so, which is coming back to the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. They had a second consultation on their diversity, equity, and inclusion requirement that be promoted in a new version of their code of conduct. Now, the IFOA has 32,000 members, there or thereabouts. And what they've done is they've published this new draft guidance on how to interpret changes they're proposing to put into the code. So the original consultation, unfortunately, did not kind of knock this dead. It is still seems to be moving forward into the Actuaries Code. This second consultation is trying to look at the guidance and say, well, can we deal with all of your worries with this piece of guidance that we're intending to publish? Well, we read through it, we had a look at it, and our answer was a resounding no. I also am aware of many other both FSU members and members of the Institute of Actuaries who similarly say a resounding no. It's as ever, you read through this draft guidance and you have on the one hand a couple of bullets that sound pretty reasonable, and then you have a next bullet within the guidance saying, oh yes, and by the way, we all have biases and we all need to have unconscious bias training, and we have a micro portal on that you can go to, and we review all the forms of subconscious bias that you have, and you suddenly think in that third bullet, oh no, we're back to the usual suspects, things that have been proved to have no value. In fact, often they cause more trouble, unconscious bias training in particular. And again, there's a comment in the guidance along the lines of, we understand that some members may not be happy with the terminology EDI or equality, and they call it equity, diversity, and inclusion. But we think it will be interpreted in a reasonable way. But the problem is, we've seen that just has not happened again and again.
Why would it be? Why would it be?
Yeah.
And what reasonable means now is going to be quite different to what is deemed to be reasonable in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, as we've seen.
Yeah, and they even make the point and say, look, this is not saying you can't disagree. And so when one of the points in the new code is you need to respect everybody. And our issue with that is there are some people and belief systems certainly where you wouldn't respect them. We wouldn't respect some of the worst criminals in society. I have no respect for them, and yet I would be breaching the code according to the letter of the law. Now they're trying to say no, that's not what it means.
That's what it says.
That's what it says. It says it says that you can disagree, but the issue we have again here is that you can't disagree because the ideologues believe that disagreeing on an ideology is being disrespectful in and of itself, even if you do it in an adult way, in a reasonable way, in a conversational, sharing information way. That then gets deemed by the ideologues as being disrespectful. So I'm pretty sure this is going to lead to a wave of vexatious complaints going over into the Institute of Actuaries. Certainly. And they're not the only regulator out there doing this. We've had to respond to consultations by the Prudential Regulation Authority, by the Financial Conduct Authority. We're looking at the moment at the Bar Standards Board. That's a really worrying one if the Bar Standards Board starts to require this, because if you think about where lawyers sit in everything we do, particularly barristers, when they're defending, either advocating for or defending all sorts of horrible characters, from this issue to that issue to the other issue. They need to be able to do that without being hamstrung by an ideology. And so we'll doubtless feedback on that. I think that one's ongoing, our response to that consultation. Yeah. But that will be a very particular. I was thinking why that is more. It's not more important, but has a very particular kind of importance, is because of where barristers sit in our judicial system.
Yes, and for our work,
yes,
in defending people who've expressed all sorts of different views. Yes, a great danger. Well, there'll be much to report back on, I dare say, next week, Tom, because we are recording this on Monday, the 4th of November, so just before the American presidential election and a few days after the Conservative leadership election of Kemi Badenoch. And do you want to make a prediction, Tom, about the winner?
I will only say this, that I went into a betting shop to see if I could put a bet on one of them. I won't say which it was. And they were very good to me, because they said, it's not worth it. The odds are just not. You're not going to make any money. You could potentially lose all of that. I don't know what I was going to put on 50 quid. I'm not gonna put a prediction in there, I'm afraid, Ben, because it's just making myself a hostage to fortune. And if there's one thing I've learned,
That's what we do on this podcast.
It's one thing I've learned every single time we make a prediction, Ben, we get it wrong. But God willing, it will be a peaceful handover from one administration to the next administration, because I think that's the thing that most of us are fearing, is a period of uncertainty and a period of disruption. So if we can possibly have a smooth handover to whichever administration it is in this extraordinarily dangerous world that we're living in, Ben, with wars all over the world, with free speech, free expression at risk in the West, I think the most powerful man or woman in the world needs to be crystal clear. And so we need to pray for all of us over the next few days, I think.
Well, we shall return next week, Tom, and see if your prayers are answered. And
yes.
Well, we may not know the winner. I mean, that's the other thing with American elections. I mean, it's if you thought our system was bonkers. I mean,
I do think the Bush-Chad
weeks of counting and
Florida issue of the 2000 election seems so innocent in relative terms. It seemed so mild in relative terms to the level of fraught debate and fraughtness in the air at the moment. So they were happier times. They were simpler times.
If there's a 269 electoral college tie, it may be quite a while until that's sorted out.
Yeah.
We shall see. We shall see. I think that's probably all from us now. We've entered the sort of wittering stage, I think, haven't we?
Yeah.
Which is fine. And thank you all for listening. And if you just joined as a member of the Free Speech Union recently, thank you very much for your support.
And we will speak to you next week. Thank you and bye-bye.